Every mechanic in Dead by Daylight that has been complained about millions of times by the community, whether it's tunneling, slugging, gen rushing, second chance perks, any of that has a counter. Sometimes this doesn't really feel true, and sometimes we may feel like we're finding ourselves in impossibly difficult scenarios in which there is really nowhere to turn and we're just going to lose. But I believe that this stems from the fact that a lot of players queue up to win with the expectation in their mind that they're going to win the game rather than learning the counters to these perks, these playstyles, and these mechanics in the game. A lot of players, and potentially you included, may find themselves not learning the killers that they're playing against, not learning from the survivor behaviors that they play against, and not learning things like the map or the current state of balance in the game while they are playing it. This brings me to talk about the what I consider the expectation problem, where players begin treating every match as a verdict on whether or not the game is fair, rather than treating it as a rep in a learning opportunity. A lot of players, I think, fall into the mindset where they are ultimately entitled to winning, and every loss must be chalked up to being the game's fault or a certain mechanic's fault. A big example of this are some of the more disliked killers in the community, such as the Ghoul, where a loss against the Ghoul, or maybe a team even gives up because they consider the Ghoul to be unfair for one reason or another. This is true for both players. This rings true for survivor mains and killer mains. So before we get into this, I want to make sure that I'm not coming off as biased. I do have split playtime before becoming mainly a killer main in my current playtime. However, I wanted to start off with Exhibit A, and this is what I like to call the instant balance reflex. Mainly, this comes from both players, but I've seen it a lot on the survivor side of the game, where we'll see a new killer drop and then the nerf demands arrive immediately. So when I'm thinking about this, I'm talking about killers like Jason, Crossu, the First, right? All of these killers recently released, and before anyone has even learned the matchup, there's already demands throughout the community to either severely nerf these killers or completely change them as a whole. A really good example of this is the Crossu, because when she did release, while she was widely regarded as a very unique original killer that behavior created, she released two abysmal ratings when it comes to playing against her. I think that, yes, we can all agree that she was probably overtuned and it was obnoxious to play against her. However, if you were playing during this time, you remember the epidemic that we had in Survivors Going Next, aka getting out of the game as soon as possible on purpose. But I think the other side of this argument is that no one really cared to learn her counterplay. Something really strong against Crossu that has been strong since the beginning of her introduction into Dead by Daylight is taking hits for infected survivors while she's in her power, and this basically forces her back to an M1 state before she can continue using her very strong chase power. This is one of the biggest examples that I have in recent times where people basically force themselves into a fixed mindset where they have a verdict first, and that is the Crossu is a strong killer. She is. However, they don't get the reps. People go next immediately because they immediately assume in their own head that they cannot beat this killer because she's just busted, and they have no other choice but to wait until the balance fixes land. On the other side of this coin, we have the mirror, the killer players. Killers oftentimes, especially nowadays, get angry at gen rushing, and I say that lightly because survivors are quite literally doing generators. That is their literal only objective. And I think that being mad at the other side, that just for the fact that they're playing the game efficiently, is the same exact entitlement, just wearing a different skin. Win expectations makes the opponent's competence feel more like unfairness. What I mean by this is that killers will see how fast 2 or 3 gens can pop, and they don't really think about the fact that when you do play a game of Dead by Daylight, if you're playing efficiently, the last 2 generators of a game are always going to take longer than the first 3. That is just the game flow of Dead by Daylight. That is simply how it is. It's always been that way, especially nowadays with how fast gens can fly. You need to make sure that you are improving at your game on killer. You need to realize that holding 3 gens is not merely a suggestion of killer players over the last decade. That is quite literally how you obtain map pressure and control of the game at the end stages of the game. And what I mean by end stages is typically those last 2 generators. Instead of getting mad at survivors for playing efficiently and making sure that they have good gen splits, work on you yourself as the killer player in the game. And I know myself, because I am a killer main at this current state in time, that you are obtaining your map pressure. You know, you're forcing survivors to have a bad 3 gen at end of the game. And of course, Like, this isn't always possible, as easy as I'm saying it, right? Everything is always easier said than done. But at the end of the day, the title of this video and the point of this video is to realize that the game is not unfairly targeting you, and you aren't getting sniped by the best four-man Swift every single game. There is always something to improve on, and this is the biggest thing for newer killer players. I realize that a lot of newer killers do not fully understand how to obtain and achieve map pressure, and how to then snowball a win off of that. And this comes in many different forms, especially depending on the killer that you're playing. But the easiest thing to improve on right now, where a lot of new players struggles, is pointing out 3 gens right at the beginning of the game and protecting that area on killer. So now at this point, I want to give you something that you are going to be able to utilize not only in Dead by Daylight, but literally everywhere in your entire life. This is a framework in psychology known as a growth versus a fixed mindset. And what this is basically summed up into is, in one concept, losses and mistakes need to be learned as information rather than just verdicts. So what I mean by this is, when you have a bad day, maybe you had a couple of bad games back to back to back, do not make that a verdict. Do not in your head think that the game is unfair or you're just not good enough. You're not able to get good enough because the chips are just stacked against you. They need to be used as information for the next time you're doing this same exact thing. So what does a growth mindset actually look like when it's paying off? Well, I have a few examples. One of the more comfortable ones that I am able to talk about is playing the Hillbilly. He is a killer in the game Dead by Daylight, of course, and one of the biggest things that is widely known about him is he is very mechanically challenging. When new players pick up this killer, they oftentimes fall flat on their face, and that is to be expected. No one picked up a mechanically difficult killer in this game or played Survivor in this game and was immediately gifted from God, just the best player in the entire world. I know when I first started playing Billy, considering myself a Billy one trick for this video, I was absolutely awful. I remember losing my very first game so badly that these survivors were literally like just laughing in the endgame chat. And the other side of this, the fun-focused survivor mains, right? When you watch like a Twitch streamer, for example, and they spend the entire round moonwalking, trolling, they have their meme build on, they got that through thousands of hours of experience in the game. They don't win every game, but they do show like excellence in chase. They toy with the killers all the time. They enjoy the match, even when they're sacrificed, because one, they're streaming for an audience. Of course, I know that makes it a little bit easier to enjoy the game, but two, they've decoupled skill expression from the win in the video game. And I think that that freedom is really what improvement feels like, is when you're able to detach skill expression from solely winning the video game, you're going to see exponential improvement in yourself, because you're going to realize that you don't need to win to have fun. You don't need to win to improve, because eventually what's going to happen is you're going to take all of these learning moments over hundreds or thousands of hours in the video game, and you're going to naturally start winning without even trying. Because you've been battle tested, essentially. You've been tested in so many different areas of the game that you couldn't possibly lose to people who are significantly worse than you, because all of this information has now been stored into your brain and you focused hundreds of hours at this point into improving. Now, the payoff, ultimately, in my opinion, and it should be in your opinion too, is the game is going to get more fun. It's not going to get easier. You're still going to lose games that you should have ultimately won. You're still going to win games that you ultimately should have lost. However, when the win stops being the point of why you play, the game gets way more fun and you're so much easier able to just like soak in information. I think this is actually why people burn out and they start just blaming the game mechanics over and over and over again. The ones having fun don't. I mean, when you watch like a Twitch streamer play the game for 7 hours straight and they don't drop a single complaint, it's because they have thousands of hours of experience in this, and they've learned so much, and they've even gotten to the point where they've really learned that the game is the game, and at the end of the day, they're still going to lose even when they played better. Now, I understand that some people are inherently competitive, because I'm the same exact way, but to loop it back to the beginning, I want you to understand and try to put this into your mindset going forward, not only in the game, but everywhere in your life. Realize that the mechanics of something are never really the problem. Yes, some things are going to be hard. Yes, sometimes it is going to be unfair and you're just going to lose when you should have won. But realize that when you take every single opportunity that you can as a learning opportunity, then ultimately over time, you're going to become a much more proficient person in whatever it is that you're doing. I want you to believe in yourself because I believe in you. I've practiced this and fixed my own mindset over thousands of hours in the video game because it's something that's important to me. And I've realized as such a competitive person, I had a tendency of just blaming the game immediately, even though I knew deep down that I have things that I can improve on myself. I know that's the case for basically everyone, and I promise you, if you put these perspectives and thought processes and simply just the growth versus a fixed mindset framework into your head going forward, you will come out the other side in a week from now, a month from now, a year from now, a much better player than you could have ever imagined that you could ever be. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you very much for watching.